Hello, everybody. This is George Bytel from Team 3488. I am the 2022 CAD team leader of the preseason, and I am continuing my series on the basics of Onshape. And with this video, we will be talking about the measure tool. I think it is one of the most useful but can get very tedious points of Onshape. It is very important to use for both people who are using Onshape to create and people who are using Onshape to kind of experiment and gather some information about what the robot is going to look like without any real CAD experience. So I kind of have a few examples here as to how to use Onshape for those who are looking to just measure and look around in a 3D model, and then those who are looking to create. So the first thing I would want to do is show the type of drop downs that you will see on the measure tool. So there's the types, which I cover in the document. I would mostly use the show all. It's going to give you a lot of information, and I'll be telling you which ones to look for when you use the show all feature. But going to each individual one can get very tedious with changing the type because when you use the measure tool, many different things are going to pop up. And let's say I'm about to show you an example with two shafts, and that will give me the center position, minimum distance, and maximum distance. But at the same time, it could also give me the length, diameter, radius, anything. So I will just use the show all position for the rest of this demonstration. The inches and degree units will stay the same. So this first example is going to be with these two shafts here. So this is going to be extremely important with belt calculations and when you deal with pulleys. So what I would first do here is select the centers of these two pulleys. Immediately, it's going to give you four different things: the center distance, the maximum distance, the minimum distance, and the length. Now, we don't need the length, the maximum distance, or the center distance. No, the minimum distance. All we need is the center distance because we don't really care what it looks like from this point to the closest or the furthest away from the furthest away. So immediately, if I was to look at the dimensions on the orientations of the view cube, the x value, which is shown here, because it's the difference between this point and this point, does not matter. The z value also does not matter. So all we're looking for is this horizontal distance, which will be done in the y-plane. Knowing your orientations and your axes are extremely important for the measure tool because, again, it will give you many different readings that you will have to figure out and sort through. So if you have this pulled up concurrently with the West Coast Products belt calculator, which I have on this tab up here, it could be very useful in finding the number of teeth for a belt, and you could also be using that to reverse engineer like last year's robot, like we're currently doing in the preseason. So this is a very basic representation of how we could use Onshape and its measure tool to find what we have on a CAD model. And another very important thing in the measure tool is just to get some very basic perimeters and very primitive measurements of what our shooter looks like. So this is the shooter from 2021. I would say it did pretty well. Uh, Immediately once I click a piece of VersaFrame, the length is 20. It'll tell me that the length is 24 inches. Now let's say we're trying to find this overall width from the left side to the right side. So all I want to do is click the a point or line on the end of the piece, and then a point or line on the end of this piece. So it's going to give me these other ones, which will be drawing a line like this, and then the Z, of course, does not matter. That's 0.006 inches is negligible. And it's going to give me the same reading in every single one of them. Now, again, looking at the view cube, the x-axis is exactly what we're looking for. So I would say that the shooter right here is 13 inches wide. And if we use the same exact idea with finding its length, click one point on the outs and one point on this outside, and don't be fooled by this 11. It is going to say 24, 24, and 24. So it is safe to say that this is 13 by 24. Now, this is kind of the end of the video for people who are really only using Onshape to investigate a current CAD model. Up next, I'm going to be talking about how we can use the measure tool to create parts. So here is a very basic representation of just some parts I loaded in MKCAD to make basically a box. It would be no different than how we mounted this shooter. We had the same exact brackets up here, and all we did was just rivet them into a box. So I've already done these two, and what we want to do here is use the measure tool to find the distance away from one another. And we're going to pick 2 points that when we create the part, they are going to be touching. So I would generally look on the outside and do not refer to this inside because this will really just be here. And this corner, think about it, will be touching this corner. So what I have is I just have a basic notepad that will keep all these readings, and I will copy paste them in, or actually just type them in. And that way I can then repeat those numbers in the individual axes and get a perfectly mated part. So in the x-axis, it is 3.365. So watch out for your sign here, because if I type in 3.365, it's going to move it to the right. So the only thing you do, and if you have the opposite problem, you're going to do the opposite of this. You're going to add a negative sign, and then it will move it to the left. Again, if we have that problem, all you do is get rid of the negative sign. So then we take the reading on the y, which is 3.308. And we're also going to have to use a negative sign here. See, it did not take my negative sign, weirdly enough. And just like that, since I already had these two, then these parts were lined up. And I have a perfectly great box, but now that can't stand on its own. So now it's time to use the gussets to mount the piece. So the best way to do gussets is to take the corner hole, preferably the side of the corner hole that will touch. So I would put this bottom and then align it to the top of this VersaFrame piece. And we're also going to be using the center distance. So just get rid of my notepad previous entries and type them in. And in Onshape, there's no way to have any motion in multiple dimensions. So again, you're going to have to go axis by axis every time. So a little bit of a test is just to make sure all of the corners line up. And then if you go to this view, they are touching. And all you got to do, you might have to do some rotation here. And then we'll do the exact same thing. As you figure out, this can be very time consuming, and especially if you're dealing with multiple gussets, such as in Indexer, or if you're mounting even bigger parts of VersaFrame or entire different build teams into the robot, like if you mount the shooter onto the Indexer or the pickup onto the Indexer. So again, we're going to use the center distance. Remember to close out of the measure tool, because then uh, it will kind of just block the screen and give you a reading that doesn't really pertain to what you're doing. So over here, I got negative 0.028, and you can do the same thing for the other axes. And just like that, it is all mounted. So I would kind of like to conclude this video with the measure tool can be very tedious and will take a little bit of practice when it comes to what you should be looking for in each different aspect. I know as the parts change, such as we might not even be using VersaFrame, we would be using RevIon maybe. They can be very different as to what you're looking for, but all it's going to take is some trial and error, and you can have a part that functions as well and will get the job done in terms of the communication of what we're actually building, such as the shooter. So this is the end of the video. For anyone watching in 2022, uh, I hope that this helps you with what we're currently doing. Anyone in the future, if some of the parts do not line up, I apologize. Uh, I hope RevIon is going to be easier to use in the Onshape, because right now it is not supported by MKCAD, but uh, I hope that this measure tool video helps, and continue looking at the Onshape Basics document.